afternoon, everyone. I'm so excited to be having a talk about GDPR. Woo! Actually, it is a good talk. It is a very important subject. So for those that have been embarking on migrating your app to be compliant or to adopt the new APIs, I feel you. It has not been a very awesome process. And I think any major change like that is like, I don't know, for those that have been in the ecosystem for a while, this probably represents one of the first times that we've put a deprecation notice out there and we're actually going to follow through with it. I want to introduce Alex Kassab, who's a senior PM, a product manager on the ecosystem team. And she's been with Atlassian for about 7 years. Recently, she's been working across a lot of teams in Atlassian to prepare for the new privacy settings and profiles and the things that we're putting out there to help increase customer trust in our products. Before that, she was a PM on the new MC, or the in-product marketplace that you see on Jira Cloud and Confluence Cloud. So please welcome Alex Kassab.
Hi, everybody. So my full name is Alexandra Kassab, but my public name is Alex. So that'll make more sense when we roll out privacy controls, which I'll talk about during this talk. So for those of you who feel duped, this talk is not actually about GDPR. We tend to talk about GDPR, and like Erica had a talk this morning about a bunch of data privacy legislation that has rolled out since May 25th. And really what I'm here to talk about is some features that we've implemented to improve user privacy. And so I'm using GDPR as kind of a proxy for privacy. If you feel duped and want to come talk to me after the presentation, I'll be here for the rest of the day and tomorrow, and then I'm always on the community, or you can reach me via my email, and I'll share all that stuff as well. So if you take a picture of anything during this presentation, take a picture of this slide, because this is actually a quick reference guide that's available on the developer community right now, and it has links to everything. This is a quick talk. It's only 20 minutes, and there's a lot of stuff that we're going to go through. So if you feel like it's a lot of information, you want to read up more on what we're talking about, it's all via this link. So here's the agenda. I'm going to talk about the new privacy features that I mentioned. I'm going to talk about how to test your app to make sure that you're prepared for those new privacy features. I think Neil kind of talked about this is the first time we're actually doing a hard deprecation at Atlassian, so testing is really important because we do expect that the API deprecation is going to cause some breaking changes. And then I'll cover off some new requirements for app listings in the Atlassian marketplace. If you caught Erica's talk earlier today, she already mentioned some of those, so I'll just reiterate it. And then if we have time for questions at the end, I'll be happy to field any questions. All right, so let's get going. Okay, so we here at Atlassian believe in working openly because when work is open, we unleash the full potential in every team. And so with the recent changes in data privacy legislation, specifically GDPR, we really wanted to understand how privacy affects a team's ability to be open. So we conducted research with customers from around the globe and learned 2 important lessons. The first is that different countries and different regions seem to have different perspectives when it comes to privacy of their personal data in the workplace. And the second is that despite those regional differences, users prefer to limit the amount of personal data they share when they're collaborating at work, specifically when they're sharing knowledge or providing feedback. So this research fundamentally changed our definition of open. Open doesn't mean all access. In order to be open and to work openly, users need to be able to trust that they have control over their personal data. Only then does collaboration become more about the work that that team is trying to achieve together rather than the individuals on that team. So the first set of features that we shipped, or the first big thing that we shipped following GDPR, was a feature that we hope our customers actually never use, which is a simpler way to delete your Atlassian account and take your personal data with you. So our old process prior to May 25th was a manual process and engagement with our Atlassian support team. So when customers wanted to delete their Atlassian account, they would raise a support ticket with Atlassian support, and then a support engineer would have to go through all of our different systems and manually delete that data. Today, the account deletion process is automated, and it's completed within 30 days across all of our Atlassian properties. Additionally, we shipped a feature for app developers to stay in sync with Atlassian in order to process data deletion for accounts that have been closed. So we believe this feature is not only simplifies the customer experience, which we believe is important even when a customer is leaving Atlassian or closing an account, but it also helps developers manage data responsibly, which ultimately improves overall trust in our platform. And this is the second feature that we're shipping in a few weeks. It's the new profile visibility control screen. So profile visibility controls will be centralized in an Atlassian account. They will replace the profile pages and controls that previously existed in Jira and Confluence separately. Profile visibility controls will allow individuals to hide or unhide aspects of their profile from other users they collaborate with. To facilitate collaboration, a version of name and avatar will always be available, but it could be a masked version of name and avatar. Apps will only have access to public values that are unhidden, that are unhidden from the public unless they've been granted access to that data with consent with the individual data subject. Time zone and locale are indirect identifiers, which we've placed under profile visibility controls as well. So these identifiers will have to respond to profile visibility controls through our APIs. So kind of in context, time zone and locale, which were previously passed through context parameters, will no longer be passed through context parameters. We've created new JavaScript APIs where you can make an explicit call for time zone and locale. So profile visibility controls, just skipping, sorry. Time zone, talked about that as well. Okay, sorry. So the features that I've just described provides users with greater control over their profile information. And in order to ship that, we needed to change our platform. So we introduced a new identity model which centralizes user profile information to a single source of truth. That's the Atlassian account. And so this is another slide that you should take a picture of if you're thinking about one, which is the deprecation date for our Jira, Confluence, Bitbucket, Cloud REST APIs, and Atlassian Connect REST APIs. So I don't go through all the details about the deprecation notices, which APIs are changing the endpoints. We don't have enough time for that. So I'd recommend looking at the docs. But it's just really important that you kind of understand that this date is the date that more broadly, the APIs will no longer pass legacy user references, so specifically username and user key. Those are being replaced with an Atlassian account. The profile visibility controls that I talked about, which changes the shape of the user object and removes specific fields based on a person's profile visibility control settings, that's not shipping April 29th. That actually will come at a later time after a period of testing. So those two dates are separated. This is just that the APIs will no longer respond to or contain legacy user references. So you would need to update your app to key off of account ID instead of username, user key by April 29th. So there's detailed API migration guides that's included in the reference links that I mentioned earlier. Again, I'd recommend you look through those in detail. And if you have any questions, either raise an issue in our developer community. We have weekly updates going on there, which kind of talk about the progress of API migrations, or you could also raise a ticket in our dev help queue for more specifics. But the detailed API migration guides talk about all of the endpoints that are changing and how to interact with them. The Bitbucket, and they also talk about some how to test. So there's some opt-in mechanisms so that you can test the new behaviors as well, which I'll cover off in a little bit more detail. Bitbucket doesn't have like a testing opt-in mechanism. It's just your Confluence and Connect that have those. So I'll talk to those in a little bit. There's also, before I move on and kind of go into more detail about testing, I want to talk about data storage a little bit. So if your app stores data, we've also released, the API migration guides talk about how to test. It also talks about tools that we've released to facilitate migration. So for example, if you need to convert JQL strings or CQL strings into privacy safe versions of those JQL strings or CQL strings, we have a PD cleaner tool that will do that for you. That's one example. And then it also talks about data storage practices, which is a new requirement. So if your app stores personal data, we've released a new API so that you can get that information about which accounts closed and who you'd have to process data deletion for. So again, I mentioned we're doing weekly updates on the developer community. So please join the conversation if you were not aware about this date and need some more information about how to prepare. Okay, so I'll go into testing. First, why you should test. I think I mentioned this, but just wanted to reiterate. There's two reasons, two changes that are coming. One is the deprecation of username and user key from our APIs replaced with account ID. So if you don't convert username or user key to account ID, we expect that your app will start receiving errors around user not found when you're using those legacy references, because we are going to permanently remove them. They're not just not supported anymore. The second thing is when we roll out profile visibility controls, fields that are hidden will no longer appear in the user object, not just return null or return empty. They just won't be present in the user object shape. So if you're relying on information that you expect to receive through the user object to provide functionality, for example, email address, which is under the default settings hidden by default, your app will no longer retrieve that information and therefore won't be able to provide that functionality. So you should be aware of what those changes are. We have APIs to return time zone, locale, email address, but you need to be able to make explicit requests, so that's why we've separated it out from the user object. And I can talk a little bit more about email address as well. The only things that, again, just talking about profile visibility controls, the only things that do return consistently are name and avatar, again, but because we have masked versions of those. Okay, so how to test your app. There's two things. One is opting into the new API behaviors. So in order to opt into the new API behaviors, there's two things that you'd have to do. For Atlassian Connect, you need to update your app descriptor with there's a new flag called API migrations, and you'd need to set the value of the API migrations flag to GDPR true. If you set the flag to false, that signals to us that you're actually aware of the change and are working on it. It won't actually change the behavior. So when you set GDPR true, webhooks should change, although there's some that are still passing a username and user key even though you have opted in. If you set the flag to false, nothing would change. Again, Bitbucket doesn't have this flag in their descriptor. The second thing you need to do is for every Jira Jira API or Jira or Confluence REST call, you need to either add a new header or query parameter to your REST call. So they have different names, but and these are again included in the migration guides. So if you're ever unsure, just refer back there and you'll notice them. But these are the two flags, either header or query parameter that you would have to add to make sure that the REST API changes to remove username or user key. Important to note with Jira, in most cases, to prepare for the migration, we added account ID everywhere username or user key is present. We've done some work to catch up. We missed a few things at the beginning of the deprecation notice period, specifically in webhooks, but in some other areas as well. For Jira, if you want to change logs to username or user key, that change logs don't have both, or don't have both they don't have username and account ID. You'd have to use the opt-in mechanism to change logs to have account ID. And then the second thing, so that's for the the opt-in mechanisms that I just talked about are for the April 29th deprecation. The next change that's coming is changes to the user object, which is happening at a separate date when we launch profile visibility controls. Currently, we're targeting around mid-May, but that may change because we're about to go into a testing period. So the first thing to do is read the guidelines. There's guidelines on the Atlassian community, which provide detailed examples of what the user objects are going to look like post-profile visibility controls with default settings, and then as users change their preferences to either hide or unhide specific fields. So for example, in Jira, this is an example of the user object. It's telling you that the account ID, which is a 1 to 128 character string that contains dashes or colons, will be present. It'll always pass avatar URLs. The avatar URLs will change, but it may not be obvious which URLs are being passed because it won't say masked version or not masked version or unmasked version. Display name will always pass with a string. The string could either be the full display name or a public name that the user chooses. So for example, if I chose to set my name to public, my full name is Alexandra Kassab, but you would see Alex in this string in display name. And with the default settings, time zone and locale are also passed, but if I chose to hide them, then they would not appear. And for Confluence, it looks a little bit different. Same thing, account ID is always passed. There's a separate public name that will always pass, and time zone, locale, and profile pictures are always there. And then display name will show up as well if display name is public, which is the default setting, or it won't appear. Or it will change to also have the same value as public name if I set my display name to public, or my display name to hidden. So the guidelines have a lot of detail. They're pretty long. The guidelines also talk about how you can set up a developer instance to play around with these different settings. So we have a developer instance, a cloud developer instance process where you can provision an instance yourself, and that's simple and easy and self-service. In order to actually get the profile visibility controls turned on, you'll need to create a ticket with our dev help crew, because we actually need to turn on some feature flags to get the instances responding to profile visibility controls, and we can also show you what the profile visibility control screen looks like in an Atlassian account. So anyway, the guidelines have all the information about how to set those things up. Okay, so last little bit, I think we're running out of time, just talking about the new requirements. So Erica talked about this in the morning. There's a new requirement to add a privacy policy to your app listing. This is a statement about how data is collected and used by your app, as well as who has access. There are guidelines that we published around how to think about writing a privacy policy if you don't already have one. The second thing is customer terms, or a EULA. So these are requirements for all apps: server, cloud, public, private, doesn't matter. So data security and privacy policy, customer terms, or EULA. Customer terms are specific to cloud, EULA is specific to server. But essentially they say similar things. So it's your agreement with the customer for providing software and services. And the last field is a registration on whether or not you're storing data via a drop-down, yes or no. There is a banner that shows up if you select yes, which talks about additional requirements for cloud apps. It's a little confusing right now. We're trying to change the banner. But it essentially talks about kind of looping back to the right to be forgotten process. So if an account closes and you're storing personal data, then you should implement the personal data reporting API, which will let us know how to tell you about which accounts you've had access to closed, so that you can process data deletion as well. So with that, I think we have maybe a minute for Q&A. If not, then you can find me after. I'll be outside, and I'd be happy to answer any more questions you have. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. Actually, we are kind of, I could probably take one question if it's a really good one. But if it's not, then we'll see you out in the hallway and talk about this. But maybe one key takeaway is that the April 29th date, you had said that that is something that is mutually exclusive, or not. The visibility controls are not coupled to that date, right? The date is about the API changes and removing the user key, right? That stuff?
Yes.
All right.
So it's just April 29th is just the APIs will no longer provide username or user key. It's not about the user object changes. Okay. It's happening at a later time.
Got it. And just maybe to survey, raise your hands, maybe just one person from each company. How many of you have marketplace apps today listed? And keep your hands up. Have you not provided any signal to Atlassian that you have been, I don't know, what are the ways?
Yeah, so please, 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 if you haven't set your app descriptor to either true or false or started testing yet, please do so, because it actually is helping us with our plans around deprecation. We need to know whether or not you are working on the changes or not. We've got a kind of a...
You can unpack all the details in the URL that Alex posted at the beginning, but it's in the app descriptor. Wow, thank you. API, it's API migrations in the JSON object, and set it to true or false. True, yes, we're golden, we're ready to rock. False, I'm not ready.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Alex.
Cool, thank you.